Welcome to a Shot in the Arm podcast. I'm Ben Plumley, and we're coming to you from AIDS 2022 in Montreal in Canada. Well, AIDS 2022, the conference has really been dominated by some really dramatic advances in the way we treat and prevent HIV, long-acting injectables. And the company that is really behind these advances is ViiV Healthcare. So it's sort of been ViiV's conference. And I'm really delighted that we're joined by fellow Brit, Helen McDowell, who is going to walk us through what long-acting is and also what the strategies are to bring it to the people who need it in the world. So Helen, welcome to a Shot in the Arm podcast.
Thank you. Really happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So a bit about you. What do you do and how did you end up in ViiV?
Brilliant question. So I head up government affairs and global public health at ViiV Healthcare, and have been in ViiV for 12 years, which is just a little bit short of the length of time that ViiV actually has existed. But my background actually is much longer than that, with a passion for HIV and global health. So I did biochemistry and genetics at university, so I am a scientist at heart. But the year after graduating, I spent 8 months doing voluntary work in rural Zimbabwe. So I was there in 1998, at the heart of the HIV epidemic, and in a really rural part of the world where it became clear quite how the impact that HIV was having, but also how it was not talked about. It was hugely stigmatized and discriminated against. And it really struck me of kind of quite the devastation HIV was happening. And then I more and more spent more time in Africa and really became passionate about wanting to be part of changing that dynamic in the longer term in some shape or form. And then came back, and actually ultimately I couldn't afford to work in the charity sector because they didn't pay you and I needed to pay rent. So I have then been in the pharmaceutical sector for my career. And have worked, in different roles over that time, but for 15 years have focused on HIV in a variety of different roles, in medical affairs, in our commercial teams for a short period, but predominantly in focusing on access to medicine, government affairs and public policy and advocacy, and working with communities and other partners to really bring innovations to the people who benefit most. So my passion is about, low and middle income countries where there is still, unfortunately, the biggest impact of HIV.
Yeah, and we're going to really dive into that in this podcast. There is something interesting about ViiV because it is sort of part of the community, and I'll declare an interest. I was in one of the former companies that makes up ViiV, Glaxo Wellcome as it was, and I was the coordinator of the Positive Action Programme, and then helped launch some of the early medications, the Combivir and Abacavir Zygen, as it was called then. So it is very much, I think, rooted in the community. So it is rather nice to see that this innovation is coming from that heritage, that pool. So could you talk a bit about what the long-acting injectable is? And we refer to it here as CAB-LA, and it's got a little bit of rilpivirine in it depending on needs and musts. So what is it and what does it do?
Yeah, absolutely. So long-acting treatment has been sort of that piece that we have been sort of working towards for many years, with the desire to have a medicine that doesn't have to be taken every day, that removes some of the challenges that people face taking medicines every day, whether it's adherence or whether it is more around stigma, disclosure and discretion of their medicine. And that's something that long-acting offers. So the long-acting medicine that we have currently approved for use is cabotegravir long-acting. And we have been researching and developing it both for use in treatment and prevention. So we got our FDA approval at the start of 2021 for treatment, and in treatment it is given at the same time as injectable rilpivirine. So every 1 or every 2 months, depending on the situation. At the back end of 2021, we got approval for cabotegravir long-acting for PrEP. And it's used alone in PrEP, not with rilpivirine, so it's just the sole agent. And that is dosed every 2 months to prevent infection in people who are over 35 kilos who are at risk of HIV. Cabotegravir is an integrase inhibitor, so it is one of that family of antiretroviral medicines. But yeah, you know, and obviously the key thing here is a hugely effective antiretroviral for prevention of HIV acquisition and demonstrated in a wide range of populations. So 2 big studies that were completed with the HPTN network. You know, ViiV very much part of the co-funding of those alongside the US NIH, and also for the 084 study in sub-Saharan African women, the Gates Foundation. But a huge breadth of people involved in those studies across many of sex with men, transgender, girls and women in sub-Saharan Africa, and spanning multiple continents. So the US, Africa, Asia, Latin America, a real drive to get younger people involved in those studies as well, to really get as quickly as possible a breadth of data for how this product can work as a PrEP option, you know, to play a role. Now, we haven't answered all the questions yet, and there is still more to be done, but it was a really solid start to show that this is a really effective tool with a great potential for PrEP.
Whether it will be the game changer, I think, is still to be worked through, but it's certainly going to disrupt. And you know, there are people who've already said that they don't want to be taking a pill every day or a group of pills every day, and the idea of having an injection every month or a few months is going to be a very significant change. And that's, you know, true for populations that, say, I'm involved in working with in San Francisco's Tenderloin, who are marginally housed, and the idea of having that regular injection could really be a lifesaver. But you talked about doing the studies in a range of populations and a range of geographies, sub-Saharan Africa, and I guess that really brings to the sort of the rub, and it's one of the things that has been, I think, a real priority in trying to understand at this conference. How do you make sure that a product that was developed with the participation, particularly of girls and women in the global south, how do you make sure, once that's approved in the north, in the US and Europe, that it reaches the women who need it in those countries? Now, you've made a number of announcements, yep, most recently with the medicines patent pool, about voluntary licensing. Could you just say a little bit about what that involves? Yeah,
absolutely. So we're super excited that this, just a couple of days ago, we were able to announce that we've signed a voluntary license with the medicines patent pool for cabotegravir long-acting for PrEP. And this, what it does is it will give the rights, the intellectual property patent rights, to generic manufacturers that are selected through a blinded, objective process, the ability to go away, develop, manufacture and supply their version, equivalent to ours, a high quality version of cabotegravir for PrEP, to the countries that are included in the territory. Now, that voluntary licenses have proven to be you know, successful for many HIV treatments, and so we're building on that platform of success. It's not a slam dunk, though. I mean, we have also seen many voluntary licenses that have not resulted in products. We do not want to be in that category. We want to be in the category of success, like we have been with dolutegravir.
And I'm going to get you to come on to that, because the point here as well is that this is an injectable.
Yes.
This is a liquid, this is not a pill. So the manufacturing, the storage, the distribution is going to be fundamentally different.
Yeah.
Now, as part of this announcement, there is a coalition that our friends at AVAC are going to be leading. What's the role of this coalition?
So the coalition is, the intent of it is actually broader than CAB-LA. It's about how do we galvanise the expertise and the resources and the experience of multiple stakeholders to accelerate availability of long-acting prevention technologies across the board. That's my understanding, because actually manufacturers are going to be brought into it dependent on topic rather than being core members of the coalition.
This is something I wanted to ask you about. It seems curious to me, and with my background in public-private partnerships, that you're not a member of this coalition. Does that concern you?
I would say I think it's early days of the coalition. We engage with probably most, if not all, of the members of the coalition in other groups and collaborations and bilateral dialogues. So we are very much connected to all of the sort of stakeholders within the coalition. We do believe that obviously specifically for CAB-LA, we have an expertise and experience with it, having developed it, both clinically but also from a manufacturing and formulation point of view for many, many years. We feel we have a lot to bring to the table. But we also have to respect that some of those groups need to have discussions and conversations that would be a conflict of interest for ViiV as the manufacturer to be at the table for. So it's getting that balancing act. We very much would like to be part of a number of those conversations and think that actually we could help make some of them more efficient. So, we hope that will sort of transpire over time.
You're being very, very polite and kind British to the partners, and British, as am I, doing my best to, after years of living in California. But here's the rub for me. It seems that, okay, the licenses, voluntary licenses that Medicines Patent Pool is going to engage in, well, we may not even get an announcement about those until the end of this year. And then there is the process of them establishing their own manufacturing, their own quality control, and that could take a good few years. So the question is, what happens in between? And I think both from engaging your expertise on how to manufacture and deliver long-acting injectables, but also, frankly, almost a sort of a carrot and stick. So the stick would be that you're in the tent, so you have to deliver in that interim period. And I know this has been a really big issue at this conference. What do we do in the meantime? We had a podcast yesterday with my co-host Yvette Raphael and the author and activist Emily Bass, calling essentially for the affordability of PrEP, long-acting, both treatment and PrEP, to be comparable with the oral treatments. Well, in terms of actual cost of goods, that's not going to be possible. So, but there is going to have to be some kind of dialogue with funding mechanisms like the Global Fund and PEPFAR, and with countries, both to put in some resources themselves, but to work out how long-acting is going to be used. Yes. So what are you going to do in the meantime? What are your plans there?
Yeah, so there's obviously this isn't a simple problem to solve, and unfortunately there's not one thing that is going to be the silver bullet that is able to address those pieces, but we are taking a very comprehensive approach of the multiple things that we believe, and I know in conversations with other partners, need to happen in parallel. So we've got obviously a piece that will be foundational is registration, and sort of starting to get those pieces in with national approvals. We've submitted in many countries already, and more will follow, as will submitting for WHO pre-qualification now that the product is listed on the expression of interest. So that's a foundational layer of things that we need to do, but will also enable and set the stage in the future for generics to be able to reference when they have made the product and able to come through. Another piece you talked about was around how do we know, or how do we help governments and other entities know who and where to support the use. So, that is around implementation research, and this is, some are frustrated by the needs or desires of some governments and global health organisations to see implementation research happen because they think it's holding up broader implementation. But it is about sort of making sure there is impact and understanding how we, as a whole field, can use the suite of options efficiently and effectively, but with impact. Most importantly, giving people choice.
Now, it's funny you say that, because one of the other key stories coming out of this conference is this need for a prevention bucket. as our colleague Lola was saying yesterday, the idea that you have something like the prevention ring, you have the microbicide ring, the piperine ring, the oral PrEP, and the injectables. Something similar could look for treatment, obviously without the piperine ring. And if we were able to get the kind of operations research, implementation science, programs and projects up and running with the US government, with PEPFAR, with Global Fund and others, do you think, and I don't want to put you on the spot here, but do you think that ViiV would be able to come to the table in a way that would allow those programs to operate without the concern about just what are the cost of goods that are going to impact us?
Yeah, I mean, so we're already, for the implementation research piece, we've been actively working with USAID and the Mosaic Consortium. We've been working with Unitaid. We're working with the Gates Foundation and other sort of independent investigators and groups to support ideas and thoughts around implementation research. And we have committed to provide cabotegravir for those operational implementation research programs to help answer some of those policy and practice questions that will be really critical in the longer term. So we absolutely have a team who are at the table in those conversations. Our desire, though, is also that we don't do 20 million studies like was done for TDF-FDC. Is like, look, we all, and then this is why I think the coalition is important, is there is an alignment on the key questions that need to be answered, and across all partners, what's the most efficient way to answer those as quickly as possible, rather than doing lots of research for research's sake.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think there is collective belief that that's what we need to do, and we need to learn from the oral PrEP experience, and ViiV is very much part of that. So yes, obviously that is part of it, and in that we are already donating product to two studies that Unitaid is running in Brazil and South Africa, and there is more to come. The other piece that I think the other one that's really important is the affordability piece, which is not related to studies. This is related to general use and ability to start benefiting from the product. And you're right, this product is complex to manufacture. It uses very specialist equipment. It needs different capabilities, capacities, and processes than oral solid dose medicine. So we can't manufacture it for the price of generic TDF-FDC. We recognise that affordability is an issue and a challenge, and we are committed to doing everything that we can to be able to improve affordability. At the moment, and our commitment is Sub-Saharan Africa, low-income countries and least development countries to sell ViiV supply at a non-profit price. We know that non-profit price, because we've shared it with people, is not affordable at the moment. And so that is the next step, and why we've got a collaboration with the Gates Foundation, MedAccess, CIF, Unitaid and AVAC, is to say, okay, let's get all those heads around the table to say, okay, what can we do to change this situation? To use innovative finance mechanisms, what could be put on the table to help us improve efficiencies and reduce the price so that it can get to a place that is affordable and can help bridge that gap until we have generics.
So with that commitment, I mean, there are two pieces that go with it, I think, from these other partners that you're describing. One is some guarantee about volume, but then you sort of can't do that until you know how the product is going to be used. But then secondly, this commitment, I guess, around the funding mechanisms, being willing to pay whatever you come up in agreement with. And so, volumes will help reduce cost, and you will have to be looking at Global Fund and PEPFAR, in a sense, subsidizing the purchase of these medications in the short to medium term. There was something else that you said that was very interesting around registration, because this deal with the medicines patent pool, it doesn't mean that you're washing your hands of registering and submitting regulatory submissions in countries. What's the plan there? What are you doing?
So at the moment we've prioritised the HPTN countries.
Right.
Obviously we want to make sure that people, and we are at the moment, anyone who was in those studies is continuing to get access to CAB-LA, even if they were on the comparator arm. They have been offered, if they wanted to switch to it due to the superiority finding, they are able to continue to access, and they will be able to do that until the product is locally available. But those registrations are ongoing. As you know, it varies very much, the timelines it takes some of these regulators to review and approve dossiers, but we hope that, we'll start to see some of those approvals come through, hopefully, in the not too distant future. Obviously then there's more that we need to do, and Sub-Saharan Africa, because of the greatest number of infections in terms of actual numbers, that is our priority, but we have a broader registration plan beyond that. The other one is pre-qualification. We know that there's a huge number of low and middle income countries that can make plans on the back of a pre-qualification status. So that is something that we are working with WHO at the moment to define the most efficient pathway for that pre-qualification submission that will happen this year. And obviously now with the WHO guidelines as well, we anticipate that many national governments and programs will start national guideline development. And that's really important, that all these pieces are working in parallel.
Yeah, that's right. And so the countries, you mentioned HPTN, the HIV Prevention Trials Networks.
Yeah.
What are the countries, do you think, that are going to be fast implementers here?
Ooh, I might get in trouble for trying to make a guess on this. It's a tough one, because I think what we've generally seen, I think, is the desires, of community may not necessarily ladder up with the speed with which that we have seen governments and public health programs move. I don't struggle to think about crystal balling it for PrEP. I can reflect on what we saw for dolutegravir for treatment. And there we saw Botswana as a first mover, and Kenya actually. And the same for pediatric dolutegravir. We saw Kenya, Uganda, Zimbabwe, were sort of faster movers. But, if it makes it more exciting for wanting to be the first, then we are happy to have those conversations and support how that can happen. I think we see a lot of energy from South Africa, but often we haven't seen, certainly in the treatment space, they haven't moved as fast actually to implement new innovations for treatment. We'd love to be proved differently for PrEP.
So if I crystal ball it, I can perhaps do this because I don't have those liabilities or responsibilities. I am so glad to hear about Zimbabwe, because that's a country very close to my heart and many of my colleagues' heart. Botswana, clearly, and South Africa. I think Nigeria is going to be very interesting. And I guess the question will be, once you start this registration process, and you have started it, and as countries look at the data coming out and the enthusiasm that is here for long-acting, there may be some of these registrations may go quite quickly. And again, I think that speaks to the need to get the this sort of interim collaboration right. Now, the other thing that we haven't spoken about, you've talked about the deal for low and middle income, or certain low and middle income countries, but what about those middle income countries that don't fit into the MPP deal, the Medicines Patent Pool deal?
So yes, so there are obviously a number of countries in that category that are very important and still have sadly growing numbers of people living with HIV. And so they are countries that we're working through and working with stakeholders within those countries to define where they are in terms of HIV prevention, their plans for the future. And unfortunately, they are in those countries. We see quite a few countries actually that are not very advanced in terms of HIV prevention or PrEP specifically. But we are trying to drive those conversations to help build a plan, whether in terms of registration, manufacturing, thinking about pricing for ViiV, our approach in those countries has always been flexible, and we use a tiered approach and flexible, so they don't obviously pay the same prices as high-income countries in the world, but they do pay a little bit more than the non-profit price as a reflection of their higher economic status in the world, to be able to put some relatively small contribution back into the pot for future innovations. Because much as we do passionately believe that this product has a real potential to change things, we know that it's not going to be, it's not going to end HIV, and we continue to need new and more innovations. And we want to also, whilst delivering this, keep fueling that pipeline of new innovations for treatment and prevention.
Understood. And I know that particularly in that recent Berlin declaration from IFPMA, which I honestly don't think was particularly helpful, but that certainly emphasized the need to recoup investment, both for, of course, shareholders and for further innovation. Now, a question that activists would ask, and have asked me, is, well, why doesn't ViiV just take affordability off the table? The ultimate contribution of ESG, and say, girls and women in particular helped get us to market. How realistic is it to think that you could just make this product available right now on a, say, compassionate use or a named patient basis?
I think it's not at all possible to do that, because the reality is, if you really looked at the number of people who you really, could sort of, on that basis, you'd be talking in tens of millions of people, which obviously would be, hundreds of millions of pounds of loss to the company. It would not be, sustainable for us as a business to make that level of loss by sort of, if you were to be equitable in doing such an approach, the sort of the numbers of potential recipients would be endless. We also don't believe it is the role of an individual private company to take responsibility for national healthcare systems, structures, investments. We are absolutely a key part of the equation to work with others to support, reduce health inequities and drive that, but it's alongside governments, global health donors and other parties as well to play a role in doing that. A single company cannot, make up for the challenges of those systems. And
I might add to that this is why this collaboration with the Gates Foundation, with PEPFAR and the Global Fund is going to be so important. I mean, we've seen from the COVID vaccines experience from COVAX, which I think was brilliant, but we have seen that, you have, or the industry has provided product, vaccines, and there hasn't been this awful phrase, absorptive capacity, to be able to actually deliver that on the ground. And I'm very conscious of my dear friend Stavros Nikolai at Aspen Pharma. They had manufacturing capacity, admittedly for the J&J vaccine, but they didn't have any orders. So it is a complex interaction. And I think what you've said, and your colleagues have said at this conference, is that, look, ViiV is at the table, we want to help, we want to do this. And so we're going to make sure to take that message back to them, because as well, we need to make sure that government authorities want to provide long-acting PrEP and treatment to the populations in need. Well, I've given you quite a tough time, and I think it's testament both to, your passion and, your experience, but I think also the companies. Again, you're part of the community, part of the fabric. What have you learned from the conference apart from long-acting?
What have I learned? It's very humid in Montreal. As a Brit, we don't deal with humidity very well. What I've learned from it is actually the importance of, not that I needed to learn it because I think I knew it coming in here, was obviously this is the first time I've seen people face-to-face for 3 years in many cases. And so to me, it's really reignited the importance. I knew it coming into it, but now feeling it, being present with people, there's just so much more creativity and, you know, openness I think you can get from physically sort of sitting together, talking, having a glass of wine and thinking about ideas together in a more of a relaxed environment than a scheduled Zoom call with a, you know, very sort of structured agenda. I think it will lead us to better places. So there's an importance here of listening, and I think that's the other important thing. It re-emphasises, and actually, whilst I've been in this world for a long time, many of my colleagues in ViiV haven't, and I think that has the conference has opened their eyes and made them see things from a different angle. And to me, that's also a really important piece of this conference, is, you know, hearing the different views and perspectives from different angles. Everyone may not agree on everything, but that's okay. And that's important actually to sort of keep us grounded and keep us challenged, and ultimately set bold targets that I'm excited about being a key part in ViiV to drive forwards. You know, challenge accepted.
Yeah,
as they say on monster trucks.
Yeah. Well, I know we're getting comments on Facebook. We're live on LinkedIn, and we are also on YouTube. And if you've got comments on Facebook, please do continue to make them, and we'll respond to them.
I just want to say, James Priyatna says, sending love to everyone on Montreal. Keep fighting for life, dignity, and humanity.
Ah, well, James, thank you very much. And James is actually a fellow board member of mine on the MTV Staying Alive Foundation. Oh. So thank you, James, and we miss you that you're not here. Terrible thing.
And actually, now you mentioned, so that's the type of thing that I think is going to be really important. So also something that, as we're meeting with the MTV guys later on, that's a really important piece here that I don't think I've seen enough of as yet around, you know, we know the tool works, but how do we make sure people, you know, not just their parents call for them to have it, is how do we get people to want this product? Because what we have seen, and I think this is one of the failures of PrEP rollout so far, is the people who could benefit from it don't necessarily realise that they need it. And so things like actually, you know, MTV, Staying Alive, Sugar, things like that, I think there's more of that actually could be done and should be done. And we, through Positive Action and other programs like that, we look forward to working with different ways of, you know, very much in a consumer mindset of changing the viewpoints of PrEP. And we're excited about that, and hopefully I'll hear more of that.
I hope so too, and I know my colleague Georgia Arnold has got some very good ideas. Now I'm going to throw you one last curveball.
Okay.
You and I are both British, and our country is having a wild ride at the moment.
Yep.
And
that's one way of describing it.
And sort of like a Love Island Conservative Party leadership election. Who will get knocked out in the last round? But I'm thinking about it in relation to the Global Fund. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I think is concerning to a lot of us is that the UK hasn't yet stepped up in making a commitment to the Global Fund's next replenishment. The US stepped up, increase of 30%. Germany's made a commitment, not quite 30%. Luxembourg, Sweden come in. And the rumour is that potentially we may not be able even to come up to our previous commitment to the Global Fund, precisely because there is this sort of internal focus on new leadership. What would your advice be to those of us that are trying to get our parents to talk to their Conservative MPs and others? How do we make sure that the UK does fulfil its responsibility, but also live up to its heritage of good support for the Global Fund?
$1 million question. If I know the answer, then obviously I would be sharing it with all and sundry. We absolutely share that concern, but we're also working very closely with all sorts of different groups. Stop AIDS, the APPG, and other groups, and the private sector, to sort of make sure we can do what we can do as a business to help educate and make sure there is clarity and understanding of the importance of the Global Fund and the work that it does. for all the same reasons as you. I think I'm not a deep political expert of the individuals involved, but I think we need to play to the areas that we know the UK government has said are really important to them. So we know that they have a real interest and focus in British innovation and science.
Hello.
So, of course, ViiV, GSK, UK headquartered company. So that to us is an important opportunity for us to say to them how important it is, look how much we are contributing, not just through your global health leadership, but through the innovation and science that is born out of a UK headquartered company. Of course, related to that is the UK's agenda around trade, post-Brexit, is around sort of the trade piece. And so whilst it may not be the exciting sort of poster of lobbying and pushing around the value of this, there is a trade element potentially as well to make. And if those arguments, economically, trade and global health leadership and global Britain can come together with, best of British business, to me those are the pieces that may have some leverage over the two sort of, final front runners. If the piece around because it's the right thing to do and we have made so much progress with the Global Fund that it would be, catastrophic to turn back from that now. But I think we have to nuance, the messaging so that it lands and it aligns with levelling up or some of the other sort of, catchphrases that are, liked in the UK government at the moment. If you measure up to those messages, then has that got more chance of having some traction, and will that get us back into being the UK retaining its position as the second biggest contributor? Yeah. We sincerely hope so. We will continue to work with partners to sort of support that request.
Well, Helen, thank you. Thank you so much for setting out what's going to happen on long-acting access, and, both in support of you and to help make sure that those commitments are delivered. We're right with you. Thanks also for being such a great guest. It's a real privilege to be able to chat with you.
Thank you very much.
Anytime. So that's it for this episode of A Shot in the Arm podcast. Thank you to our director, Erica Spera from Newsdoc Media. Thanks also to Cindy Wilson, our producer extraordinaire. Continue to have a great week and a safe week, everyone.